So this month, we're talking about religious educator, self-care, and spiritual practice. So welcome. I appreciate that you have taken the time. I know that your days are busy, and I appreciate that you're with me during this time. I want to start with reading a poem by Mary Oliver, one of our beloved and revered Unitarian Universalist poets. It's called The Journey. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. I sometimes think of my religious education career as a journey. And so this is a metaphor that works for me on several levels. But just this idea that there are these voices and there are these tugs and there are these pulls. And in the end, what we must do, the work we must do, is save ourselves if we're going to learn and grow and develop into the kind of professional we hope to be. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about self-care, spiritual practice. During that time, I will share a few tools with you and end with a few resources for you to look at later. Self-care involves the need to develop a vision for one's life and to develop a plan that allows one to live out that vision. It involves caring for the whole, mind, body, and spirit. It involves understanding that before we can be effective in caring for others, we must be effective in caring for ourselves. I think we often see and hear that metaphor of putting the face mask on ourselves before we care for others. And in this work, there's a lot of emotional investment, a lot of emotional energy in our work. There's a lot of passion coming from us. There's a lot of emotion with the folks that we're working with, because religion is like that. Religion brings emotions to the surface sometimes. And when we're working with people's children, that is another place that can bring emotions, where emotions can emerge. People are very invested in the activities and the stories and the experience that their children are having. And so there's this high level of energy, emotional energy around our work sometimes. And sometimes that can feel suffocating. It can feel like there isn't enough space in the room for us to be who we are, for us to be who we need to be in that moment. And so we need to find ways to refresh ourselves and to get more oxygen into our brain and into our spirit so that we can be the best religious educator that we can be. There are plenty of loud voices and loud things around us, barriers to us really feeling in control sometimes of our work and of our work life. Um, Lack of time is one that I hear so often. Many of our religious educators are working with only a few hours, maybe a quarter time or half time, or even a full time position without the kind of volunteer or administrative support that they need. So lack of time is real, but there are time management possibilities for us. Lack of energy, and this can happen in a number of ways. This can be just sort of a lack of physical energy because we're not taking care of ourselves in the way that we maybe could. It's also lack of emotional energy, lack of spirit, because we're giving so much of ourselves that our well is going down and down and down. So we need to find ways to refresh ourselves. Guilt is another possible thing we can experience, or a barrier to wellness. Sometimes we just are worried or concerned, or we have a lot of work and we know that we can't get it done, and we allow negative feelings, negative emotions to take over. Sometimes we're afraid of not appearing competent, and people perceiving that we're not doing a good job. And sometimes it can be the cost that's holding us back. There may be things that we would like to do, take a yoga class, or participate in some kind of a reading group, and the cost, the time and money is the thing that holds us back. So I invite you to just take a moment now and consider what's holding you back. What might be something that's keeping you from spending that time, from giving yourself the gift of time and and self-care. So just take a moment. So we know that the work of religious education, whether you are a paid professional or a volunteer, comes with significant challenges. There seem to be many little mountains to climb in our everyday work life. For some, it's that there are just too few paid hours, and that the work that needs to be done spills out over into our personal lives and begins to spread a little bit like hot lava across our family lives and across our personal needs. And um, and it can create, sometimes we can build resentment over that, so it can create some negative energy within us. In many situations, the world has changed, our context has changed, how people come to our congregations, and their expectations around volunteering has changed dramatically over the last couple of generations. And it's not just us, it's scouting, and it's PTA, and it's many kinds of volunteer dependent organizations that are struggling with how to get the work done, because that little army of volunteers has always been an important part of getting the work done, and there just aren't as many as there used to be. So when we think about some of the, particularly the administrative challenges, or the need to be in several places at once, there's a critical need to delegate, and that's a real legitimate challenge that we're facing. Another challenge that sometimes we face in this work is isolation. particularly in rural areas or maybe in a smaller congregation where there aren't other staff. Maybe there's not even a minister. Maybe the minister is part time, and so you're doing the work separate from other people. So there isn't that water cooler kind of dynamic that happens in many kinds of work situations. Or sometimes there isn't really another group of religious educators, a cluster, or a Loretta chapter, or some other group with whom you can gather once a month, once every couple of months, and so that isolation really gets into our heads sometimes. Sometimes we're working in a workplace that where there's conflict, and conflict is definitely uncomfortable, and it can begin to impact the quality of the work, the way in which the work gets done. It can influence our attitude and our commitment to the work that we're doing. The conflict can be with other staff. It could be with volunteers or leaders. It could be with parents or other congregants. We could be having a conflict with another committee around space within our facility. We need space for our religious education classes, and another group has co-opted our space or is making demands. So there are conflicts that happen, and many of those conflicts are low level. But if we're not tuned into how we can manage that, how we can regulate our own emotions and lower our own anxiety, that becomes a significant challenge for us as well. There may be things happening at home. Obviously, our work is important to us, but it's not all that's going on, and it's not all that's within the lens of our living. And those things spill over. So the conflict at work can spill over into home and vice versa. And another significant challenge sometimes is just that we don't have the skills that we need to do the job. And certainly there are many experienced and journeyman religious educators who even find themselves occasionally facing a challenge. Wow, I don't really understand how to do some of this technical stuff. So you might be a very experienced and knowledgeable religious educator, and you will still find challenge in the work. And it's hard to know, where do I go? How can I solve those challenges? And so that can really lead to just self doubt and a lack of confidence sometimes in our work and in our own success. So, again, take a minute. Um, just think, what are your biggest challenges? It might be some of these. There might be other challenges, particular challenges that you're facing. You might be in rented space. You might be sharing space with a nursery school, with a preschool. So think about what your challenges are, and then take that a step further. Think about how those challenges impact you in terms of your own spiritual strength. So just take a minute and make a couple notes for yourself, or just reflect. I'll wait. So one of the things that can sometimes contribute to um, some negative feelings or some stress in our work is our physical space, the physical environment. I know that in some congregations, the religious education office is a shared space, and it may be shared with other individuals. It may be shared with just a whole lot of stuff. In some congregations, the religious education office is an afterthought, that there isn't really adequate space for an office. Um, so sometimes you can see from some of these pictures that there can just be a lot of stuff around us, and that can begin to infiltrate our sense of well-being in our work. Clutter is stressful. And there are studies that have proven that the more stuff we have around us, our brain responds differently. There's too much visual stimulation for our brain. So we look around and maybe we can't find that creative space that we need to find, or that quiet space that we need. Maybe we're writing a story, putting together a story, or writing a newsletter column, that the clutter sort of begins to infiltrate our thinking. So take a look around your office, and see, and look with that outsider's eye, and what is it you see? I know that my office is not looking really fabulous right now because of the kind of work I do. I'm in and out of my office and off doing workshops, and I'll often come home and just leave all the stuff from the workshop in a pile because I've got to turn to the next thing. And eventually that there begins to be this sort of symbiotic thing where the state of your office begins to reflect kind of the state of your state of chaos, and a sense of chaos within yourself about your work. And that can lead to stress, that can lead to anxiety, and um, that can affect our well-being. So just want to talk briefly about a few strategies for self-care, and keeping yourself on an even keel within this work. Number one is to be gentle with ourselves. Practice self-compassion and self-kindness. I'm going to show you a website that's called selfcompassion.org, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But one of the things that the author says is to treat yourself as you would your best friend. Sometimes when a friend calls and says, "Oh, I'm having the worst day," or "I need support, I need you, I need to talk," we'll drop everything. We'll stop and we'll ask questions, and we'll offer hugs, and we will offer support to another in a way that we might not think of offering to ourselves. Um, and she even advocates the practice of a self hug every now and then. Are you feeling stressed? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling that you don't have the skills and the expertise that you need in this moment? She says, just, put your arms around yourself. There's something that happens in your brain when you are feeling that sense of being enveloped in one's arms. And she said we can do that for ourselves. Another simple strategy is hard. I'm not a good this is a growing edge for me as well, but setting boundaries at work and at home. How we keep those two things from spilling over in ways that are unhealthy is really important. Many of us, myself included, have the particular challenge of working from home. So My work and my home, the lines are very, very difficult to distinguish. I can do physically separate just by closing the door to my office. My office is in a separate room. So I can close the door. And as long as that door is closed, sometimes I can actually compartmentalize and say, okay, now I'm home, now I'm at work. And that door is an important metaphorical boundary, physical and metaphorical boundary for me. So you need to figure out sometimes where are the challenges that you're having around boundaries. Is your home filled with work stuff? That's one boundary. If it is, take it, box it up, keep it in the corner until you need it, and cover it with a lovely piece of fabric, and put a vase of flowers on top of it. So take that stuff and turn it into something that can bring you joy and can reduce your stress. And the same thing can happen at home. We're working, we set aside the time for work, and so many things can intrude. Our children, um, my children are grown, but when they were young, every time I got on the phone for a phone call, oh, mommy, I need something. And so finding ways to set those boundaries for yourself um, on both sides of that equation. We need to engage in healthy personal habits, and that can run the gamut from eating well, whatever that means for you. There are no prescribed diets for religious educators, but it means taking care of ourselves. It means that we exercise and get away from our desk, find ways to nourish our spirit by moving our bodies. That could be a form of spiritual practice. We'll talk a little bit about spiritual practice a little later. We need to find appropriate ways for having technology in our life. And appropriate can also mean, what are the limits of technology? When do I set aside the phone? When do I stop answering emails? And I have a very active inbox in my work, and it's hard sometimes to say, oh, just one more email, or this person really needs to hear from me. So there's a lot of self-regulation required in trying to achieve a healthy work-life balance. We have to figure out what is the strategic no. What can I say no to today that will feed me, that won't increase my anxiety in unhealthy ways? And, there are those things. There are emails that sometimes you can just respond to a person and say, I got your email. I need a couple days to respond. Thank you for your email. And you've responded to them, so you've perhaps reduced their anxiety or alleviated their anxiety a little, and you've given yourself some space. I know that sometimes when the emails pile up and the stress piles up, um, we can make bad decisions. We can make bad decisions in by sending off an email that maybe in retrospect we might wish that we hadn't sent. So those healthy personal habits can keep that perspective for us, so that we can avoid the trap of making a bad decision. There's a lovely book by the Reverend Scott Alexander called Everyday Spiritual Practice. And in that book, it's a series of essays by a number of Unitarian Universalists and others. And Michael Schuler, who's a minister in the Midwest, has one where he talks about he's a Buddhist, and he talks about the middle way. And he begins with the story of Siddhartha, where Siddhartha went out into the world and really eschewed all kinds, everything in a material way, and went out seeking some true spiritual enlightenment. And after years, he found himself exhausted, mentally and physically exhausted, and spiritual enlightenment still eluded him. And he realized that he needed balance, that there was a balance between the spiritual and the material. And so there's this middle way. And Michael's essay is wonderful, and I'll see if I can't copy it and send it out as a resource for you after. But he talks about how, we don't, if we're talking about spiritual practice, for example, some people will say, oh my God, I don't have time, I can't add one more thing, and I just can't do that every day. And it doesn't have to be another obsession or another thing on your to-do list. Spiritual practice needs to be something that is sort of a genuine relief for us, and something that we are genuinely passionate about. And it doesn't have to happen every day, but it happens enough that it introduces joy into our lives. So finding that middle place and paying attention to your own spiritual life. The old expression that the plumber is the one with the leaky pipes, it's a little true for us in religious education, that our job is to be a pastoral caregiver for our families and our children, and our job is to lead people on coach and follow and companion and be a spirit guide for people in their spiritual work. And yet sometimes we neglect that part of our own work. And it's wonderful to just take a moment every day to just say, how is your soul? How am I doing? What do I need today? What do I need from the universe? What do I need from the people I love? How is your soul? So you can't read this, but you're going to get the PowerPoint. But this again is this Kristen Neff, who wrote this book and has this website called Self-Compassion. And this is a blog from educators, for teachers, for professional educators in school, about self-compassion as a way of balancing and keeping ourselves from burning out. And she says that the first component of self-compassion is self-kindness, treating ourselves with the same care we would give a loved one. As teachers, as religious educators, we care for our students and the people in our programs, but we often forget about caring for ourselves. So I will provide this resource to you. The website is later in this presentation. She also talks about reining in our inner critic and replacing it with a voice of support, understanding, and care. So finding that inner voice that can help us feel good about ourselves can be a really important practice. This is an exercise that I invite you to think about, and maybe you can do this in journal around this at a later time. But it actually comes out of the old administration Renaissance module. And it's a great metaphor thinking about your life as a house. So, our bodies, our kind of the totality of our lives, our mind, our body, and our spirit are one house. And there are different places within that house where we spend our time. We have a social space where, like a living room, where we engage with friends, we engage with family, we engage in our work lives. The Sunday morning time where we're talking and we're social and we're um, chatting away and having our coffee. There's also the kitchen, and that's kind of our work, our chore space. So that's where, we're cooking, we're preparing, we're thinking about that how we're going to meet the needs of our work and of our home, finding the tools that we need to do that work. There's the private space, there's the bathroom. That's where we really think about our physical selves. We think about the kind of exercise we need, getting to the doctor, getting our eyes checked, going to the dentist, doing all of those things that are very important. And yet it's easy for us to push them aside. There's the garage, and that's where we do our work. That's a space that's separate from ourselves and our who we are authentically. Uh, it's important. It's where our creative, often where our creative spirit lives. It's where we spend a great deal of our time, and where we get a great deal of our satisfaction, maybe balanced with some frustration, but it's an important part of our house, and it's attached to our house, but it's not integral to that house space. And then there's this little space off in the corner. Maybe it's like the little room that Harry Potter lived in under the stairs. And that's the me space. And that's a space that we go without other people sometimes. And it's a space that is separate. It's really, there's a door, and it's really separate from the living room and separate from the kitchen. And we all need that little me space. We all need to get into the closet. So it's just a metaphor, folks. But it's one that I think is fun and interesting. And so I invite you to think just briefly now, but maybe spend some time really meditating on this a little bit later, and think about, where do you spend most of your time? And is that where you want to spend most of your time? So take a moment now just to think about that. So some of the most important practices that we can do for caring for ourselves are building community, whether it's community of folks like us, perhaps other religious educators, or whether it's a community separate and apart from our work. It's important to have a support network. Striving for balance in really intentional ways is important as well, to keeping ourselves whole and keeping ourselves well. Now, balance isn't always going to be completely equal. There are times when our work or our home, or we're going to tip towards one or the other. And sometimes we're even going to just topple all the way over. But we kind of rebuild that stack of stones when we need to, and try to keep it balanced. Again, there's no perfection. Ritual can be really important to feeding our spiritual selves, and just for our own comfort in our human existence. Some of my most treasured rituals involve, yes, coffee and tea, um, dinner with the family are things that are really important to me. Often when I come into my office, I will light a chalice, and I've got, I've got a battery operated candle, but just coming into my office and lighting that chalice, turning that switch, tells me that I'm in a different space now. And what's great about lighting a chalice is that I can turn the chalice off. And that says, now I'm in a different space again. And that space is my home space, or that space is a space outside of my work. So creating rituals can be a really powerful way of, um, of caring for ourselves. I know that many of my colleagues create a small altar in their office or in their home office, and I have a small altar here. It's really hard for you to see, but you can kind of see in the background. It does involve some stuffed animals, some of which were my children's, and some of which were just sort of metaphors for other experiences in my life. So creating an altar can be one way of creating some spiritual practice. And sort of self-care kind of spills over into spiritual practice sometimes. Other rituals around um, things that we do with our bodies, classes, um, meditation, yoga, running, walking. Spiritual practice is everywhere. Uh, for some people, spiritual practice seems mysterious, and it seems like something that I need to do every day, or it's not real, or it needs to be something arty or something really special. But spiritual practice is all around us. If we are looking for ways to grow our spirit and to soothe our soul, we never have to look far to find things that can bring those things into our life. Simple chores around the house, doing the dishes, laundry. I know many folks who, myself included, who sort of feel a sense of that folding laundry is a Zen practice. Music. Music can be a very a beautiful and nourishing kind of spiritual practice. Cooking. Nourishing others around us, nourishing ourselves from in a physical way can be nourishing to our hearts and our souls. Walking, running, gardening, being in nature, finding ways and opportunities to be in to be closer to the earth and the world around us. Laughter. Laughter, finding humor and fun in life is a wonderful spiritual practice. There actually are spiritual practices around laughing that some people engage in. Art, labyrinth walking, um, prayer. whatever form, whatever kind of prayer or meditation you might want to engage in, can be very much a spiritual practice and can really open up places in our heart and in our minds for thinking about deeper questions, for finding, for settling the anxiety and reducing the stress in our lives. So spiritual practice doesn't have to be something specific. It doesn't have to be something that is the same every day. Although practice does imply that it is something that we are doing regularly. One important practice that I think we all can do is practicing gratitude. And I think there's something perhaps in our theology that invites us to reflect on gratitude and to be appreciative of the world and the people around us. Keep a journal. Write down the things that you're thankful for. Sometimes I just use Post-it notes. I have a Post-it wall, and I just will write down something that's happened or something that I'm feeling, and I'll write it on a Post-it note and put it up on the wall. Writing a thank you note. So actually going through the motions of saying thank you to someone, that little prayer can be very meaningful to both the giver, the sender, and the receiver. Taking a walk and just looking around, taking a walk to nowhere, not a walk to the supermarket or not a walk from your office to downstairs to the classroom, but a walk where you look around and you see things that perhaps you haven't seen before. You appreciate the art on the wall. You appreciate that someone has lovingly cared for a plant. You appreciate that someone has thoughtfully swept or washed a window, and just take it in. Just keep your eyes open to what's going on around you. The simplest kind of practice can be just start each day. What am I thankful for? Open your eyes and say, I am thankful that my bed is warm when it's cold outside. I am thankful that my spouse, my partner, has made coffee. So start the day thinking about gratitude, and end the day with the thought, what was the best thing that happened today? What am I most grateful for today? And there are studies, and I have not captured them for you here, but there are studies that have shown that this gratitude practice can have a significant impact on our psychological well-being. So it's important. And this is a website, and of course you'll get the PowerPoint and the site of just 9 ways to practice gratitude. Just look around and try to see somebody through new eyes. Perhaps somebody that you have had difficulty with, or someone you've had conflict with. Try and think about them in a different way. Practice humility. Humility is a really can be a very challenging practice, because that's not something that is valued so much in our society. So there's lots of different ways to practice gratitude, and it's a wonderful place to start. So I challenge you, if you aren't already don't already have a sense of what your rituals are, to think about, what do you do during your day? What are the rituals? What spiritual practices are you already engaging in that are really meaningful and valuable to you? Are there other things that you wish you could do? And if there are, what do you need? What are the steps that you need to take to make that happen? I was always a runner, and I had a terrible traumatic broken leg several years ago, and I can't run anymore. And so I wallowed in this sense of what I couldn't do, and my frustration and my anger and my loss and my grief over my changing body until I found what I could do. And that began to become a spiritual practice for me. I could walk. So think about your day. What are the rituals that are meaningful to you? Remember that finding balance is really significant. This is There are times again where balance is going to tip one way or the other. This is the nature of our work. It's the nature of life, that we can't be all work or all home life and all the time, and we can't have perfect balance between the two. And people with great gifts, says Ralph Waldo Emerson, are easy to find. And I know that many of you are extremely gifted in your work, and I appreciate that in you. But symmetrical and balanced ones, not so easy to find. So, some good resources for you. If you're really finding yourself struggling and out of balance, you need to maybe touch base with your Loretta Good officer. If you're finding that your emotional well-being is very out of balance, perhaps you need to reach out and seek some kind of professional support, whether it be a professional spiritual director, another minister, perhaps other than your own, who is likely to be your supervisor as well as your coworker, or a medical professional if you need that kind of medical support. Don't be afraid to reach out. A great resource is your Loretta cluster or just other religious professionals. Find there is goodness sometimes in gathering and in building community and sharing our appreciation for the work that we do, for the impact that we have on the lives of our families and our children and our youth. And it's just wonderful to have someone to share that with. It's great to have someone to share the challenges with and to work through the challenges with as well. And don't discount your minister as a supporter. Another resource is the Everyday Spiritual Practice book, which I recommend to you, and also the Self Compassion website. There's some good stuff there. She did a TED Talk, if you are a follower of TED Talks. So 20 minutes of good stuff. She also has some guided meditation, some MP3s. You can just click on it. It's about a 15 or 20-minute guided meditation about self-compassion, and there's several of them. So if you need to have somebody sort of guide you through an experience of calming yourself and of just relaxing and letting go of stress, a guided meditation can be a wonderful practice. And then there's things like Tiny Buddha. You can just go online and you'll get a daily email with some enlightening and or interesting stories to help you to help you reflect on your own life and where you are. But think about that. What kind of questions do you have? What ways have you found to manage self-care, or to find a spiritual practice that's both doable and satisfying for you. And share those ideas. Share them with your fellow professionals. Share them on the reach list, if you're on the reach list or the Loretta listserv. So I close again with Mary Oliver. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? May your day be a blessing. May you be a blessing.